and welcome everyone. We are back with a new episode of APIM Hotrod. It's the first episode of 2026, and today we are here with Jetro. Jetro, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's good to see you again, both of you.
Wonderful. And also, welcome back, Stefan. It's the first time we meet each other in 2026, so
yes,
best wishes to you as well.
Happy to be here today, Massimo, and happy to have you on board, Jetro, for this episode. And so I guess we're going to talk about Azure security, right? Or security in general.
Exactly. So Jetro is an expert in cybersecurity and cyber resiliency. So maybe Jetro, you would just want to introduce yourself, yeah, a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity. Well, the way I position myself also on LinkedIn and to my customers is I want to help European organizations move from fragmented cybersecurity to well-governed cyber resilience. And I want to just contrast those two because I'm sure it will frame the rest of our talk together. You have cybersecurity on one hand and then resilience on the other hand. And what you're seeing is all the last couple of 2 or 3 decades was about security, cybersecurity, which is basically trying to defend yourself against attacks. But what you're now seeing, and especially in Europe with the latest legislations, is a move towards resilience. And cyber resilience basically means like, guys, we're going to get attacked, we're going to be knocked down. How fast can we get back on our feet and continue the essential service delivery? Right. So the mindset is shifting from security only to a mindset of resilience. Right. And then I added the adjectives like fragmented cybersecurity, because what I'm seeing in the field when I talk to my customers and I'm seeing it is like very fragmented approach. Like they got a few heroes in the cloud team, they got a few security heroes on the networking team, let's say, but it's very scattered, it is very fragmented. And I want to help organizations move towards well-governed cyber resilience. Well-governed means you take everything into consideration, not just technology, but also the people and your suppliers and your customers, and basically the whole 360 degrees. That is well-governed. And so that's what I do. And in my daily life, I am a fractional CISO, so I support multiple customers at the same time on the CISO role. Last year, I did the Flemish government, for example, a department of 1,000 people and an agency of 250 people. Now I'm serving as a NIS2 program manager at a big biotech company, market capitalization of $50 billion. So helping there with cyber resilience. So I've seen a lot, and I'm happy to share my findings. I also worked on Azure, as you may know, that a few years ago I was at a big telco operator in Belgium on a sovereign cloud and hybrid cloud. So I have my Azure credentials, and happy to talk to you guys about all of this.
That's great. That's great. So, yes, I have just some curiosity about you mentioned sovereign cloud. So, what is your opinion? What you see on the field, for example, over there? But like, if maybe we can start from so, as your role of CISO. So, what are your the top priority for a season? For a CISO when building a secure cloud, for example, in Azure or in any other cloud environment? What are those top priorities from your point of view?
Yeah. And I have some preparation, some talking points I definitely want to cover. But from a CISO perspective, so the Chief Information Security Officer perspective, what for me is very important is compliance and good governance. So for me, the tooling and the exact settings and features of a cloud platform are less relevant to me. It's more about, can we guarantee that we are as secure as possible? And the way to do that is, number one, using a lot of automation. Right? So when I talk to different customers on different sizes of their company and different maturities and cloud adoption phases, let's say, I would highly recommend to go for as much as automation as possible. When you're building out your landing zone, put security there as well. Too often we see the developers, going all in on Azure or whatever cloud platform, and then activating all these features. And then I ask, what about security? And it's often an afterthought, or it's a different team, right? or it's Johnny from security and we forgot to ask him about his requirements for Azure landing zone. So what I find important is I write a standard, which is what I expect as a CISO to be the minimum features or functionalities that you have activated on Azure or any cloud platform for that matter. Right. So for example, there must be already identity first security. Right? There must be MFA activated. There must be logging, both on API logs and user logs. And I want them centralized, and I want a SIEM to have all of those logs ingested and analyzed. Right? And whether that SIEM is running on Azure or it's on premise, for me, that's a second discussion. But please, developers, when you activate Azure and you go all in, make sure you have those architectural decisions already included in the beginning. Yeah. That's my primary focus.
Yeah, but then Jetro, I would like to bounce on what you said. So because that's indeed very important, the governance, I would say in any area, of course, security even more probably. But actually, what I see often on the field is kind of a, you always come from on-prem typically, at least in the enterprise world, right? And so then you start the cloud, or you have already started your cloud, and then what you see in many companies that, okay, when they start the cloud, it's kind of separate bubble, so the traditional teams less looking at what is this bubble, right? And so then you have cloud competence center, then they start to indeed have ingest, let's say, different profiles, and then the bubble starts growing. And then the traditional teams need to take over, or to really play their role fully. But then what I see when you reach this phase, if you reach this phase, let's say, is that then the tooling is also an element of discussion, because typically you mentioned the SIEM, right? So yeah, you want one SIEM centralized. And so, and that is often a problem because it's the case for any area, right? For the SIEM, for firewalls, for whatever, single pane of glass somehow. But that means then that often if you do this, then of course it means that you might not use even some cloud native capabilities, you see. Hey, what's your view on this? Because or sometimes you might even have, okay, if we talk more concretely, you might have Splunk on-prem or QRadar, and maybe they are not sized correctly enough to ingest all the logs coming from Azure if it starts growing, you see. And then okay, you have your single pane of glass, but maybe not the most effective. You see, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. And what I had to learn as I grew in my career from cloud specialist towards the CISO role is also to distance myself a bit more from the hands-on choices and decisions. So I'm delegating more towards the teams and say, this is the objective. We need to have good logs and log ingestion. What is the best path forward? And one could be we're going on cloud native SIEM like the Sentinels. The other one could be we have to push everything to on-premise. The third one could be a two-stage approach where we first, all the cloud events are on a cloud-based environment. And then in the second phase, it's getting, stage is pushed towards the on-premise. I had to learn to let go of those exact decisions and delegate it to the team as long as we capture the objective. So for me now to answer that question is like, it depends on the environment, the maturity of the people as well. But I need those log files or those events as visible and as fast as possible. Because the second, go ahead.
And then for the decentralization, because actually, okay, centralized, but there are some activities that you might say, okay, maybe it's good to also decentralize. You see what I mean? So kind of shift left, decentralized, which in the end is also more scalable, right? If you have more and more things going in parallel, then having a central security team looking at all, and you see, which could also become a bottleneck. So in your opinion, are there things that you can decentralize easier, or you say it depends on, of course, of the DNA of the sector you're in and so on, but that's also something that could help basically scale, right? I don't know, do you see that companies doing decentralization? Because I see more centralization today, but it could also be an approach to decentralize a bit more.
Yeah, and here is I got to rephrase it. When I say I want centralized logging, I should restate it as I want the centralized dashboard. the source behind it, there can be multiple sources, one in the cloud, one on-premise. But when I talk from a CISO perspective, I want a centralized dashboard where I can see all the logs or the events or the incidents. I don't want to look at 3 different dashboards. So to answer your question, technology-wise, you can have decentralization, even multiple vendors with their SIEMs. But from a CISO perspective, I need one dashboard.
Okay, yeah, good.
Okay, great. So in your top priorities, you mentioned, you mentioned also governance, so security and governance, and also one of the things that you mentioned is about sovereign cloud. And recently, I read somewhere, so I just wrote it here, this sentence. So customers do not want a sovereign cloud, but they want a compliant cloud. So talking about governance and compliance, so DORA, PR, you mentioned NIS2. So what is your opinion about this statement? So does it sound, how does it sound to you?
Yeah, that is true. Customers first want a compliance cloud or a compliant cloud. If you look at the market, most organizations, especially now with NIS2, need to become compliant with NIS2. Either as an essential entity or an important entity. Essentials having more strict controls, 230 or something controls, while on an important, it's less, it's 135, give or take. ISO only has 93 controls. So you see, as you have to become more compliant as your organization based on the activities, you need more controls. So organizations want to be compliant, number 1. Whether it's ISO compliancy or NIS2 or the Siphon or DORA. So that is true. I agree with that statement. The question then becomes, in all of those legislations and systems, it's always about risk management. So an organization needs to be able to perform continuous risk assessments. What are my risks? What are my critical assets? Databases, data sets, people, key devices, key services. Where are they located? And what's the risk? Right? And so sometimes you have to decide that in order to lower the risks, you have to be sovereign, more sovereign. But sometimes you can say, in order to lower the risks, we need to go all in on public cloud due to the innovation, because if we lag behind on innovation, that's a business risk. So you go all in on cloud. What I've seen, for example, at the Flemish government, I'm seeing, and by the way, for those who don't know, the Flemish government is like an octopus with 100 of types of agencies and departments, and they're pretty much independent on their technology stack as well. And so you're seeing a lot of these agencies and departments going on-prem or staying on-prem, I should say. And I asked them, like, why are you not using public cloud? And they say, for us, it's a risk if we lose this type of sovereignty that we have. I've seen other organizations that need to focus on fast go-to-market and fast innovation, and they need to have the latest services on AI, and they're going all in on cloud. And I asked them as a CISO, what is the risk if for whatever reason there is an unavailability of those services? Yeah, we'll take the risk because we need to move fast. Right? So it's based on the type of organization, but both of them need to be compliant. Right? So yes, I agree with the statement. Customers want a compliant cloud or technology stack. And then whichever route you take, the sovereign or the public cloud, let's say, the less sovereign one, is depending on the context.
And maybe can you also then clarify, because it might not be obvious for everyone, what a sovereign cloud would be? Because if you take, for instance, Azure, we know that US government is a sovereign cloud, right? China, because China has its own rules, right? And so just Azure comply to this. But okay, I think in the mind of people, a lot of the new regions like Azure Belgium Central, or or let's say I don't know, Austria, whatever country, they think that because this is in a country, right, in your local country, then it's sovereign. And so, can you a bit clarify what really a true sovereign cloud means?
Happy to do so. Now, I want to take one step back, because I think there is a more important concept than just sovereign cloud. And the more important concept is digital sovereignty. Right? So sovereign cloud is part of that question, but the bigger thing is digital sovereignty. Right? And if you take a look at digital sovereignty, and I will share afterwards the diagram that I have in front of me, it has different elements. And the higher you go into the stack, the bigger the sovereignty that you have, the digital sovereignty. So at the bottom of the stack is data sovereignty. Like, where is my data? What's the regulation? What's the portability, right? What are the data transfers? And typically that is the view of the DPOs, the data protection officers, the GDPR folks, right? They're looking at the data. And by the way, we do this in our daily lives as well. If you choose any tool for your personal productivity, one of the questions is, if I ever exit this tool, what's my exit strategy? Can I get my data out of this system? Yeah. So that's data sovereignty. One level up is technical sovereignty, which is, am I able to protect my technical assets? So not the data, but the layer up, like the hardware and all of these things.
Compute and so on.
The compute, the storage, the networking. Can I own it? Can I control it? That's the technical layer, let's say. One level higher in the sovereignty stack is operational, which is all about having key access. Who has key access to my environment? If I'm in a data center, even if the data center is, let's say, in Belgium, and it's a private data center, but it's not mine, other people have physical access, right, to the data systems. That's operation. Who's working there? Who's doing the maintenance? One level up is assurance. Like, can I be sure as an organization that there is business continuity? When I host my environment there, do I have business continuity? What if there's a flooding? What if there's a disaster? Can I recover quickly? Right? Redundancy and all of these things. So those four, so data, technology, operational, and assurance, those four layers is still within the scope of the CIO or the CISO. Right? They have to make a decision, where will we store our critical assets? Right? But that is just fourth out of the 6 levels of digital sovereignty, because there are 2 higher levels that I also want to challenge. And as a CISO, I also bring it up to the boards, right, and to my discussions with the CIOs. Because one level higher than all of this is the supply chain, your supply chain sovereignty. Because I need machines, but those machines need chips, and those chips are produced somewhere outside of, let's say, Europe. So that's the supply chain sovereignty. And because if there's a disruption there, let's take Taiwan, for example, if it gets disrupted, whatever, in the end, it's going to cascade down to our organization.
Yeah.
And the highest level is geopolitical sovereignty, meaning, am I economically dependent on others, the trade and all of that. So as you can already tell, the top 2 levels, geopolitical and supply chain, are outside the scope of any organization. That's on national security level, right? So now let's talk about the cloud, Azure, Google, Amazon. If you think about that from a European perspective, the top 3 hyperscalers are all outside of Europe, right? The HQ, they're all in the US. So even though they can install wonderful data centers here with the beautiful services that I highly can recommend in the right use case, you lose digital sovereignty. And you may, and they are trying now with Azure has also, Microsoft has invested a lot in data sovereignty, right? That you can add your own encryption. You now have confidential computing. So you try to eliminate the cloud provider from having access to your data in an unencrypted form. So they're adding these controls, but still, if you take my levels, which comes from a great report, it's still on the data level that you have more sovereignty, right? The higher up you go, the more you lose as you are in public cloud. Right? So I always give that frame of reference also to the board, that they understand a sovereign cloud is just a sovereign cloud on the lower levels.
Yeah,
right?
Data mostly.
Data and that's it.
It's also about who operates it, right? So I mean, the physical facilities, because I think Germany at some point, and then they went back to, I'm not sure what's the state exactly anymore, but I know that if we take Azure, for instance, if this is not operated by Microsoft, then somehow, and by a local provider, right? Then you have also a bit more autonomy because you still have access to physical, right, infrastructure. And that's also one of the conditions to be more sovereign. But of course, that's still when you were talking about the geopolitical aspects and so on. Of course, that's not yet to that level. But
Yeah, but
okay,
it's
well, that's
important.
good to clarify this. Yeah.
Yeah, and once again, there are organizations that are happy with just data sovereignty. I mean, cloud has so many great benefits. So I'm actually an advocate of public cloud for the right use case. Right?
Yeah.
But also, I'm now seeing more and more organizations that say we need more sovereignty, digital sovereignty than just data.
Data.
Right? And then now you have providers, I won't say the names, but in Belgium and Luxembourg, that are now offering even more sovereignty, like even with the people working there. So on operational level, they place their own people there, and you're still having some public cloud benefits. So you see they're trying to get up the stack, adding more sovereignty. But it's never a binary choice, like yes or no. You have gradients.
Yeah. That's good.
Great one. That I think on that discussion we can continue really for hours, especially when you just look at the current geopolitical, as you were saying, situation. I mean, all over the world, and what happened in some countries like France, and where they are really pushing on their own private cloud, or let's call it a national cloud, since some years. That's one example, but there are tons of other examples that they're pushing more, or if you don't want to say on premises, but a little bit out of those monopoly that the hyperscaler they do have. That's interesting. So we are around 20 minutes. I don't know. We have time for one last quick question. Do you think? Yes, Stefan? Jetro? Okay. So yes, it's just one of very recurring questions. Like security and governance are complex and for sure costly. And so how do you see the balance between developers, as you were saying, that they are jumping into in their productivity delirium in clouds like Azure and security? How does company found this balance, or there is no balance? It's always a fight between these two forces. What's your take?
Yeah,
my take on it is
maybe because I think a better way maybe to rephrase it would be, okay, how do you make sure you have a well-governed and secure environment while not killing or slowing down innovation and time to market? Because that's a real balance you need to have, basically, right?
Exactly. So the first thing is talking towards developers, but also architects. So I take the whole technical team. My recommendation number one is when you're moving to public cloud or using public cloud in your ecosystem, design for resilience. Right? Assume that for whatever reason there are going to be interruptions, the public cloud will be not available. Design for resilience. Right? Now, I'm not talking about a backup location on Azure. I'm talking about critical systems that we have to keep running towards our customers, right? And using public cloud as a great benefit. Design for in your architecture, already think of the key points failing. What can we do to have resilience there? Right? Even if it's like a seam logging, let's say it goes down or whatever, or the API is down, what do we have as an alternative? So design for resilience, number one. Number two, do as much automations as possible. Right? I'm still seeing a lot of developers, cloud developers, doing manual things, which could be automated or scripted. Right? So I would say focus also on scripting than just manually configuring things. And then number three, when you have designed your landing zone, now it's time to deploy the applications. For the software development team, include in an early phase the security analyst, security engineer, because you want to have security as early as possible involved, and the shift left mindset. And it doesn't have to be a Mr. No, which is typically seen as a security guy. Mr. No, can we do this? No, it's not secure. But include those requirements of security as early on, because that will help you still move to cloud and still innovate, but in a secure way. So those are the three things I always want to focus on. I really believe, and I don't know if, I'm sure that one of you has heard it already from me, but if configured well, public cloud is more secure than on-premise, but if misconfigured, your data is on the streets. Right?
Yeah.
And that
I
is
think
because
I quoted you already on that one, Jetro.
yes, and I always shock people and the boards as well when I say this, because people move towards public cloud with an on-premise mindset, right? And that's the biggest security risk that I see. Let's move to cloud, and they still think they're running a VM as if it's on their own premise. Right? But they have to understand that identity is now the first line of defense. Everything is public. The default settings are not always secure, right? Because even on Azure, you have to deactivate some settings or change some settings. It will incur more costs, right? But they're more secure. So to talk about that, I think it's as a CISO, it's also responsible to train or let the people be trained in security, cloud security, I think the basics. You know? So those are my key points there.
For me, Massimo, what I would add, so of course, more kind of practical advices. So more focused on Azure then, of course. If you have really well-crafted policies and so on, right, that are enforced already in your environment, very well-defined landing zones that, of course, include security. For me, that's the main goal of having landing zones, is to make sure that before you deploy the app, you know that it's deployed to a secure environment and, let's say, scalable, whatever other attributes you should have. But then if you have a well-governed environment to start with, then, of course, you can then be more flexible as well with application teams. Right? Because you know that what you really don't want to happen is already strictly controlled and denied by policies. So somehow then you can, feel more comfortable and say, okay, no, you can delegate more to application teams, so because your really key things. So like you mentioned, Jetro, indeed in Azure or any cloud, most services have multiple usage. So that's why, for instance, you could have a storage account with, right, a public container, completely public, internet facing and anonymously accessible. So then, because you would have a static website, just to say, where you want, in this case, and everything to be public, you don't care, that's fine. But of course, if you configure it this way and you put, I don't know, customer data in there, that will be that's the data on street that you mentioned. So that's a shared responsibility. But then if all of that can be controlled, right, with policies, you really make sure that all of that cannot happen in your environment. And then once you have this certainty, then of course you can delegate more and so on, because you know that this will not be violated. Or at least it would be a cause of violation if not respected, let's say. So
yeah, exactly. And Azure policy is beautiful in that as well, where you can automate so many things and have it controlled. And our Defender that does continuous the CSPM, the Cloud Security Posture Management, beautiful things. So definitely. What I also want to add is, and I've done this a few months ago at the Flemish government. I sat around the table with the infrastructure team and as a CISO, and I said, guys, moving forward, this is now the standard. And I gave them a 10-pager, right? This is now the standard for any hosting, whether it's on-premise or in the cloud, that I need from a security perspective. And I walked them through it. And it's a very practical, just bullet pointed, points and group per themes. What do I want on logging? What do I want on identity management? What do I want on resilience, right? And without going into the nitty-gritty, how to configure it, but this is just what I want, right? And they were like, we've never seen this before, and really helps us still using our innovative environments, but in a more secure way. So I think CISOs, if you're listening in the audience, if you are, or you're an information security officer or more compliance, make those standard documents in such a way that they're vendor neutral, but still technology oriented. Like you explain what you need, and then you let the teams figure out how to best configure it. Give them practical advice. Yes.
Thank you. Great. So we are at the end of this episode. Thank you so much, Jetro, for joining this chat. It was very interesting. Thank you, Stefan, as well, of course, as usual. So yeah, we are at the end. It's time to say goodbye to you and say thank you to our audience, everyone who is watching this video. See you next time, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you guys.